The first panel is entitled Responding to a World in Crisis. And what we're really trying to do with this one is set the scene for where we are at this particular moment in which international affairs and conflicts seem to have quickened and are leaving many people bewildered. We've got a terrific panel and I'm going to get them on now and introduce them once they're on. So please join me in welcoming our panel. Are you going up the end? Yeah, sure, thanks. Hi, Karen. Well, I'm going to go from the far end, Congressman Pat Harrigan first. Harrigan. Now, he's got quite a military record, several combat tours in Afghanistan, finishing up with US Army Special Forces, 3rd Special Forces Group, I believe, with a tour of Afghanistan, and then going into politics and becoming a congressman for a district in North Carolina, which is very much airborne and special forces country, isn't it?
It is.
And he's a Republican congressman. So it's fantastic to have Pat with us. Dame Karen Pierce, who is chair of the Ditchley Foundation now, but was, of course, British ambassador to Washington from 2020 to 2025, and is now the Special Envoy for the Western Balkans, I believe is correct, isn't it, Karen? Then we've got General Onno Eichelsheim, who is, by background, an Apache helicopter pilot and squadron commander, later involved in Dutch defense intelligence, and now, of course, is one of those chiefs you saw coming up for the photograph at the beginning. He's
one of the beautiful chiefs.
The beautiful chiefs.
That's pushing it a bit.
That sounds Trumpian, but we've got...
I didn't say it.
We've got so many chiefs, beautiful chiefs. So that's terrific. So we've got one of our chiefs on stage, which is excellent. We'll lend some military rigor to our deliberations. Albin, Kurti. Now, you're originally from Montenegro, is that right, Albin?
No, I'm from Pristina, but my father is from...
Your family?
Yeah, from the border between Montenegro and Albania.
Yeah.
No, it's nearby Ulcim. It's nearby Shkodra in Albania. So,
the key thing is he's the Prime Minister of Kosovo and led the self-determination movement and is very much, of course, an active figure in the politics of the Balkans. And then Professor Julian Lindley-French, who is the chair of the Alphen group and has a background both, I guess, in academic strategy, but also you've been an advisor to two former chiefs of the defence staff in the UK.
One of whom's here.
Indeed, I see him. And NATO commanders as well. So you've been very much sort of in the engine room of trying to make strategy in perhaps one might say, times when the pace of change in foreign affairs was a bit more glacial. So I'm going to ask you first, Julian, to sort of set the scene and take on the question of, have we got ourselves in the right mindset? Have we forgotten how to make strategy? Did all those years of Iraq and Afghanistan, the so-called contingency operation, leave people misunderstanding what war is, what war requires of us as societies? Big questions.
Well, the answer is no, but let me start with some good news, if I may, Mark, which is my congratulations to the Russian Navy for successfully escorting a Royal Fleet Auxiliary tanker through the Channel this week. I think that in itself is indicative of where we're at. Now, this bloody word strategy, which is the most overused word in this business, is basically, what do you want? How badly do you want it, and what are you prepared to do to get it? And are we passing those tests? No, we're nowhere near passing those tests. With respect to the Secretary of State this morning, I just do not see the evidence that the ends, ways and means relationship vital to delivery are in any way there. Where is the actual long-term plan? Where is the actual funding in relation to the scale of the threat we face? Now, we keep putting NATO front and centre, which I passionately believe in, but then I put that up against what I call the Riga test. The true test of this country's strategy, which is the aim of which is no war in Europe, is that can the people of Riga in Latvia sleep peacefully in their beds, now and into the future? And the answer, frankly, is increasingly no. And until we match the scale of threat we face with the mindset to confront it and dominate it, then the business we are really in, deterrence, not defence, is in danger of failing. And let me conclude with this. Churchill famously said, however beautiful the strategy, one must occasionally look at the results. And we've got into a habit of presenting politics as strategy and never looking at the results. And the results are coming back to bite us.
Good. Well, there's some pretty important thoughts to start with. And that spontaneous approbation from the audience, which is terrific. Albin, you're looking at this from a particular position in the Balkans, and I'm wondering about what your experience in that part of the world tells you about how we should be addressing this. And if I may add a specific point, the one that the Chief of Defence Staff made, it's all very well that our focus is on Iran right now, but as he put it, the persistent threat is Russia in our European space.
I fully agree. I think that Russian Federation, after this aggression in Ukraine, which is not the first aggression in Ukraine, is not going to stop, because hegemony is in the DNA of the state of Russia. And with despotic President Putin as its head, things could get only worse. We've seen that hybrid war is not a substitution for war, is a preparatory phase for war. And nowadays, you have news if there is no hybrid war in a certain round of elections. Otherwise, hybrid war has become a norm everywhere. That's why we need to build resilience, adaptability, and my country, Kosovo, paradoxically, find it easy because we entered in our statehood building through war and after the war, which was the last war in 20th century. However, I'm a bit more optimistic about the region of Western Balkans because this is the first war in over a century in Europe in which the Balkans is not taking place. You know, we never miss an opportunity to jump in. However, this shouldn't be like a reason for too much relaxation, so to speak, because Serbia is proxy of Russia, and there are 48 forward operating bases around the border of my country, and they are in the so-called ground safety zone of NATO. There is a Kremlin office within MOD of Serbia in Belgrade, and Russia Today and Sputnik Regional Center in the Balkans is in Belgrade. But people are pretty calm, I must say, because there is no more, in the Balkans, there is no more nationalism of masses as fuel for war machinery of dictators. We have gone through that phase in the 90s. That is over, and now only certain criminal structures linked with autocratic leaders can create problems. And we have seen in our region that if criminal groups do not reach Kremlin, Kremlin reaches to them. Mm-hmm. And what we need is rule of law, anti-corruption. We need democracy, human rights all over, and we need more solidarity. In case of Ukraine, this solidarity, I believe, should express itself, let's say, in a European or international brigade of volunteers under command of President Zelensky. Ukraine is a great chance Europe to get united in another level. I think that if EU manages certain battles in this decade, next decade might easily become EU decade. And here I'm very optimistic that both NATO, especially UK and US, can play a great role, because in my view, the Western democratic world has all the tradition and the means to preserve stability and the values which maintain dignified life of all the people and every individual.
Well said, sir.
Thank you. General Eichelsheim, I wanted to ask you, given what we've heard about Russia, about the need to think more strategically and about the persistence of this threat, and indeed there's some sense of urgency, what is your own take? What is your timetable? Because presumably you have a directive from the Dutch government to get much more on a war footing.
Yeah.
And we've seen, for example, different assessments. If the war in Ukraine stopped tomorrow, how soon would Russia have rebuilt capabilities sufficiently to be a really serious threat to Europe? So what's your sense on timing? How long have we collectively got?
It's always difficult to set a time, but for us as leaders, the Dutch armed forces, we said between 28 and 30, the forces need to be ready to deter and defend. And primarily, like you said as well, it is about deterrence. So, and if you look at deterrence, it doesn't matter when, you need to be deterring fast. So speed is of the absolute essence, that we use speed in getting our forces ready. So readiness is linked to the timetable. But for us, it's 28 until 30, my forces and the Dutch forces need to be ready. And NATO is clear about it. We had an agreement last year in The Hague. Everybody grows to 3.5%. If you do that together, you are capable enough and you are ready enough to deter and defend. We have a regional plan where we have our forces hooked up into, and we need to be flexible to get the forces also on other locations in the world where necessary. Could be in the Middle East, could be in the Pacific, and could be, for instance, in Greenland if the Russians are in the Arctic area and you have to defend Denmark together with the alliance. And getting those forces ready means investment, but it also means adaptivity. I can invest in the conventional capabilities, but that will not be smart. They're not there soon enough, not in 28, not until 30. So you need to use the new technology, including AI, to get your forces up and running fast. It is not about investing in a nation because I am Dutch, I need to invest in Dutch companies. No, it's not that UK should invest in only UK companies. It is Europe. It is Europe that you have to invest in together. If you don't do that, you cannot scale up, you cannot innovate fast enough, you will not be ready in 28 and 30. Yes, you can spend money in UK, I can spend money in the Netherlands, but it will not help us military. We need UK in Europe. Europe needs the UK. It's not UK, it is Europe. And if we find that out, like you say, it is defending ourselves together within NATO as an alliance, as European nations, speed up the processes in adaptivity and new technology. You can do that with the European nations together. Readiness is not only by getting the forces ready, but also your society. It surprised me as a Dutch thought that we started a program 4 years ago in the Netherlands. I was the lead in it, and the director of the National Counterterrorism was the lead in it together. He was from the Justice Department, me from the Defense Department, that we started a program to build resilience within the Netherlands. And the program started with the different departments, that we made them aware of the fact that there will be a threat, that there is a chance that you go to war, or any other crisis like a pandemic or a shortage in electricity. We need to be prepared as a society to get more resilient, to help out each other in the villages or your neighbors, to help out the defense forces when they go to war to the east. And I thought, as a not per se pro-military nation as the Netherlands was not in the past, that would be hard, but it was not. 4 years later, we have a national resilience training where we train civilians for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and they get reserves and are ready to help us out where needed. They are ready to protect the critical infrastructure of the critical elements. We have the trains and the train railways that are being diverted so we can track, we can transport all the capabilities from west to east easily. We have discussions in the Netherlands about not per se getting all into the forces, but how can you serve for a year with the society and also within the Netherlands as a gap year and get them into the force. So something changed radically in 4 years in the Netherlands, that the society has become more resilient. We sent out a paper last year, 20 pages, which described how a civilian in the Netherlands was able to protect itself when we were in a crisis. We would normally not do that 4 years ago. That would be a disaster. But now it is accepted. So it is not about the readiness of your own force, it's also about building up the resilience in your society, and it can be done. But you need to be clear about the communication. If we say we go to 3.5%, then go to 3.5%. Because otherwise industry will not know what they have to adapt to, the forces will not know what they're up to, and the partnership doesn't know what you can rely on by each other. We are in the eastern flank. We are with the JEF nations, the Baltics in the eastern flank, together with other nations. If I cannot build on the US or the UK or other forces within that alliance, I have a difficult task. So everybody should go to the 3.5%, or actually the 5%. And if you do that together, you can deter.
Yeah.
So it's not that hard for the military to do this, but you need the political will, you need the continuously communication that set up that path to the 3.5%. And we will go to 3% in 2030 and then build it to 3.5%. So I can build the force, but we have to do this together.
And just before I come to Dame Karen, do you have a sort of year-by-year bar chart showing you the pathway to 2030 and that increase in funding? General, because Air Chief Marshal Knighton doesn't.
No, I have it.
Yeah, you have it in the Netherlands. Yeah, you have a clear pathway to that 3% by 2030. Yeah. Okay.
And we build an investment program which is primarily focused on AI, on automated systems, on autonomous systems, on air defense. It's not about building a huge force. It is by making the force way more adaptable to the fight of it is today. So it's a huge change within the armed forces itself, but it's also something that we have to work on with industry. And it is set on paper now. I know where to go to, and the industry knows where to go to. So it is very helpful.
Now, with Dame Karen and Congressman Harrigan, inevitably, I think we will talk about our relationship with the US. And in this moment that we're in, with instability in Ukraine, in the Gulf, how we should see that going forward. So, Dame Karen, I'd love to get your sort of perspective on this. Are we talking about long-term changes in that relationship? I remember even Robert Gates back in 2011 saying the Europeans are going to have to pay their way or we'll pack up and go home. You know, so this is a long-term issue. In what sense is President Trump just channeling that long-term trend and doing it in his own unique way? Or is this a rupture in which we can't even have faith in Article 5 guarantees anymore?
I think it's an evolution. I think not just Robert Gates. You have to remember that Eisenhower thought the Europeans were not pulling their weight. So this is a trend that has been a long time coming, I would say. And then the second thing I'd say, that had it not been for the wars in the Balkans and for the invasion of Ukraine, it is conceivable the Americans would have taken troops out of Europe earlier, because when you think about it, 50 years, as it was when the Kosovo conflict started, 50 years after the founding of NATO, and large-scale American forces were still on the territory of a friendly country, looked at like that, that does seem as if there's scope for evolution. Of course, the Kosovo conflict, the subsequent events, and definitely the war in Ukraine changed all that. And now we have an immediate crisis where it's very important that we have American forces that we can work alongside and rely on. But I think the premise of your question is correct. The transatlantic alliance is evolving. It's evolving in the right direction for the Europeans to do more, as we've been hearing. And President Trump, in my personal opinion, was right to challenge people to spend more. Now, at the moment, things are rockier, perhaps, in personal relationships than would be ideal. But the personal relationships do not define the UK's relationship with America, and they don't define NATO's relationships, and they don't define Europe's relationship. There's a steady bedrock there of cooperation, shared values, shared kinship, which will continue. But NATO is, as the General said, has a lot to do to meet the challenges of AI, cyber, quantum. I think it's rising to that challenge. And I actually think it's doing rather well in that respect. It may be one of the very few international organisations that is making a determined effort to get into the modern world. And then, of course, it's made more complicated by the everything, everywhere, all at once nature of the problems that we face at the moment. But I think the direction of travel is about making NATO fit for the world in which we really are, and not the world in which we were 20 years ago.
Congressman, we're getting sort of signals, some of them quite explicitly from the President, about, you know, there's going to be a reckoning with NATO, about failure to support the US in Iran. A lot of people, I think, are saying, well, hang on a minute, you guys told us to focus on Europe, and that's what we're trying to do. So do you feel, well, give us your sense of the mood now in Washington, D.C., this question, prolonged question that we've just exposed with Dame Karen about burden sharing, you know, are we doing enough? And what do you think the administration wants to see from other members of NATO now in the years ahead?
Well, first and foremost, it is great to be back at London Defense Conference. This is my second year. I enjoyed it so much last year that we decided to reinvest this year despite the shutdown, which meant that we had to invest personal dollars to actually come here, but I thought that it's worth it to be part of this crowd. I will say Ian told me that we are trying to make London Defense Conference the less stuffy version of Munich, and I took that very seriously, and I lost my tie. But it appears in the effort to achieve this goal that I have approached this endeavor alone. But we Americans are now used to doing things alone, so it's quite all right. Look, I think a lot of progress has been made, in all seriousness. I think a couple years ago, and as you said, even perhaps a generation ago, we were having the incipient discussions of what ultimately is a readiness question. Are we actually ready to tackle the challenges that we have ahead of us, both individually and as an alliance? Because at the end of the day, alliance is only as strong as the weakest member of that alliance. And the President has been incredibly clear, incredibly explicit, sometimes from the Europeans that I've talked to, perhaps a little prickly, about being very direct that we need to do more and we need to do better with respect to our defense spending. And that's something that we have to do in the United States. It is also something that NATO member states have to do here in Europe, because fundamentally, and I agree with Julian, we are not ready. I think we in the United States have been very clear that we are not ready. We are very capable, but we are not ready, because we have adversaries that believe in a very different style of war than the war that we traditionally believe and have, in my mind, lied to ourselves that we are very good at practicing, which is limited conflict. Our adversaries believe in total war. And I think that that has become very, very clear as the world has become a much, much more dangerous place. But I think the nature of the conversations this year and the nature of the conversations with many of the defense chiefs that are sitting here in the room have been in my office in Washington and have said, you know what, despite the seeming unfriendliness, despite the prickliness, despite the directness of the conversations that are being had from the United States to Europe, they're right. The President's right. And we need to stop lying to ourselves that we are ready, because we are not ready. We have a lot of work to do, but we need to do that work together.
Yep. Thank you. Julian, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I'm just finishing a book with two American generals, Hodges and Allen, and McRyan, an Australian general, called Future War in the Pacific, which will be brilliant and very reasonably priced, by the way. And you know what I've seen from actually researching this book is the overstretch that the Chinese are imposing on the Americans. How it's changing their assumptions. If we Europeans want this alliance, we have to keep America strong where she needs to be strong. That's the real deal. Yep. Now, what does that mean in terms of the minimum? The minimum is a Europe that can act as a first responder in a high-end emergency contingency when the Americans are forced to be busy elsewhere. Because the Chinese and their useful idiots, the Russians, will not make America's life easy. But for us to do that as Europeans, we have to plan on the basis of the worst case. We have to go back to a culture of worst case planning. And with due respect to the Secretary of State again, when I hear this nonsense, and it is nonsense, about increased spending, actually we're not increasing spending in this country. Several other countries are not increasing spending properly. The time taken to deliver the kind of first responder force implicit in the Congressman's statements is far too long. Germany will take far too long. France is in a similar mess than we are. Unless France, Britain and Germany lead this process, and we represent 90% of all defence R&D in Europe, with 70% of all defence investment in Europe, it will fail, and the alliance could fail. And the missing ingredient, Mark, is leadership and ambition.
Dare I say, I think you're being a bit unfair on Germany there, in the sense that their defence boost package, the theoretical 100 billion, but it's a lot, aims to supplement defence spending in an immediate and urgent way, in a way that the UK and France cannot for various reasons. So I think perhaps you're being a bit unfair.
Well, I mean, first of all, the Germans are starting from a very low base.
Yeah.
And second, the internal politics of the SPD and the CDU has not been overcome in regard of delivery of the Zeitenwende. So there are reasons.
General, when you were speaking and you were talking about the need for Europe to get together, to not think in sort of old school parochial industrial terms, do I sense a frustration there that things like the safe fund, these sort of fights playing out between Britain and France and all these other things about who gets which? Talk to that a bit, because that's fascinating.
You already saw that I was frustrated, so... no, but it's not about frustration, it's about there is a chance here. We know that we can adapt fast with the new technology that is ahead of us. We know that we have to achieve results cheaper, faster with the new industry, so that's a chance for Europe. If you can align yourself, if you can align, like Julian says, France, Germany, UK, working together and making research and development and innovation together, you will get the products faster. We can innovate on all nations, but scaling it up and providing the right capabilities for the forces that we need. The shots here at the front row, we know what we want, and it doesn't matter to us if it is a UK plate or a French plate or a German plate. We don't care. We need a capability. We need a service, perhaps even, that's provided by industry, a service that can help us fighting the new war. So, and I think we can only get there at a low cost, at a high effect, if we join our efforts. So it is a bit frustrating, but it is also it is doable, because if we can work together as a couple of nations, it doesn't have to be the whole of Europe at that first moment, but if we can join forces with a couple of nations and start from there, I think you are able to do this. But you should not do this only by nation. It is a combination of nations.
I'm going to come to audience questions in a second, but I'm going to ask one last one of Dame Karen. In the context of what the General's saying, what Julian's saying, and this imperative to get our act together at the European level, the Congressman has also said it, how far is Brexit still a factor here? And does the new language from the Prime Minister mean something? I mean, I hear it, but I think to myself, well, I think the EU, other members, will take some convincing, and everything tends to happen quite slowly there. So how far does this have to work at the European level? How far do we have to mend the Brexit issue in order to get the kind of thing that the General is talking about, really meaningful cooperation in defence industry, to use that terrible cliche, at pace?
Well, I think as everyone's been saying, it's all too slow. And we don't really have the urgency that ought to come from the situation that the Congressman and others have been describing, and how you inject that urgency absent an immediate crisis in Europe. I'm afraid history shows us that's very hard to find the energy in a vacuum, as it were, to put that amount of energy in the system. But I think the British government and the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have been very clear about wanting much closer, much more load-bearing, much more productive relationship with Europe. Some of that's about market access and goods. Some of it is, as you say, about defence and trying to find a way that we can be not just interoperable, but much more standing in for each other, collaborating on defence industrial projects. Now, I do have a worry about that, about competition, but I think the situation is so important that we just have to find a different way to deal with the competition aspect of having governments direct what gets produced and who gets to produce it. I do think the Airbus consortia is a very good example that is capable of being replicated in a defence context. I'd also like to put in a plug for the sort of incentives that the Americans have for defence industry and other industries. Their incentives come thick and fast, and especially fast. In Europe, we spend a very long time trying to concoct a complicated series of incentives. Congress has a fund, or it offers a tax break, and companies go and get on with it. So I think we need to be more agile across the board, and for the British government, we certainly want to work much more closely with European partners right across all the challenges we face in this first quarter of a very difficult and contested century.
Right, your questions. Now, I see some hands already going up. I am going to take one from the Sky app because, well, they've made it available to us, so let's use it. But then I'll come to some questions in the room once I've done one of these, and then I might go back to the app. Who knows? I think perhaps we can direct this one initially to you, Albin, and then maybe to Congressman Harrigan. The panel's focus is understandably, this is from Joshua Huminski, sorry, I should have said, is understandably on responding to a world in crisis and the threat from Russia. But what about shaping the future threat from Moscow by introducing strategic dilemmas into the Kremlin's calculation through NATO or European actions? Taking the initiative, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. There must be more engagement with Russian opposition, because victory will be victory of democracy. It's not going to be victory over this evil empire, it will be victory of democracy. Second, it's important to understand that the national liberation struggle in Ukraine will define the fate of our children and grandchildren in 21st century more than anything else. So if we care for our children and grandchildren, then we should care for Ukraine to come out victorious in this war. Third element is, as it has been mentioned, is military industry. We need not just to buy, not just to use, not just to train, but we need to produce ammunition and military equipment. However, this is, again, not enough. What I do in our country, Republic of Kosovo, is engage with youth. It's very important to engage with youth because we're losing contact. This generational gap is problematic, and hybrid war could be fatal. That's why we need to engage with youth. And whole of society approach in Finland and in Latvia is something that we're doing in my country, in addition to education for security, which is the title taken from the program in Poland. Education for security and comprehensive defense. And last but not least, besides engaging within our countries with youth, we should engage with the countries of Global South. Engaging with the countries of Global South, I think, is one of the greatest factors of deterrence in relation to Russian Federation, but also China.
Congressman Harrigan, a point there about political initiatives and mobilization to try and get the Russians reacting rather than us reacting. I guess as an ex-military man, you're used to the idea of taking military initiative. What would you say NATO needs to be doing to be less reactive and to be creating strategic dilemmas more for the Russians?
Well, I think we need to be partnered in creating those strategic dilemmas, but right now I think we are creating a lot of strategic dilemmas for Russia. If you look at, and somebody said earlier today, we cannot lose sight of China. We can't lose sight of China. It's the greatest single strategic adversary, most complex and complicated strategic adversary that the United States has ever had in its history, and the West has ever had in its history. And I understand that that's debated over here, but it is true, and we need to be very clear-eyed about that. And the one thing that keeps Xi Jinping from waking up in the morning and saying, I'm going to take Taiwan, is, number one, the most recent exhibition of American capabilities. There's no question about that. But number two, it is the 50-nation alliance that we all share that is his enduring threat that keeps him, hopefully, every single morning when he wakes up saying, I'm not sure that I can take Taiwan. We need to continue that dilemma for him, and the best way to do that is to drive a wedge in his ally base. And if you look at what the United States has actually done in the last year, we have started picking off their most strategic allies. It started with the deep penetrating strike into Iran against their nuclear capabilities. It continued with snatching and grabbing the president of Venezuela out of his country, systematically decoupling that nation from China with the continued actions that the United States is taking diplomatically in that country. And now, with the targeting of Iran, we are taking their ally base off the board right now. We are changing the paradigm of the security situation as it relates to our strategic adversaries, which absolutely is a net negative for Russia. Despite what is being publicly said right now, what is being privately discussed is a very, very different matter, and I think we should be very clear about that and continue those strategic dilemmas on the political side.
I've got to ask you before I come to an audience question, you don't accept then that by activating the Strait of Hormuz and holding hostage global energy, the Iranians have turned the table and undone some of that work that might have been done last June, or in Venezuela, the other things you mentioned, in terms of deterrence?
I think it's created a number of political dilemmas, but I think from a military perspective, it's incredibly instructive to our adversaries what the United States and vis-a-vis our ally base are capable of actually accomplishing, because at the tactical level, it is absolutely dominant, no question about it.
Ed Lucas from The Times. Now, do we have microphones, or will Ed just project?
Speak up, Ed.
Hang on, there's one on its way to you. So I should think of 5 seconds of things to say while the mic travels down. This is the state microphone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. Thanks, Mark. Edward Lucas from The Times and the Baltic International Security Centre. You're absolutely right. We're not ready. And it's clear that in 5, 10, 15 years, things will be a great deal better. So my question to the panel is, this isn't a football game where you wait for the referee to blow the whistle before you start. Why would Putin wait until we're ready? Surely the fact that we are slowly making progress creates a very dangerous period in the next years, months, perhaps. And I'd be particularly interested to know with the Dutch Chod, with his background in military intelligence, how is the threat forecast changing? How scared do we need to be? And what should we do to make Russia think again and rebuild our deterrence in these dangerous months or couple of years ahead of us?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's about also creating the dilemmas. I fully agree. I think the speed is not there, so it will make us look weaker than we would if we would be able to speed up the process of getting our forces up and ready in the beginning. So the best defense here is having the alliance continuously together. So have no discussions about, is the US going to help us out, yes or no? There is no discussion there. They will help us out. So the best deterrence at this moment is showing Russia that you are still an alliance and that you're working together. And the other side is, like I said, we will not wait until Russia does something. We have to look strong and show them that we are able and willing to act. And that's the way that we do that, is to get more exercises, to be more present on not only land but also sea, also in the air. So our presence as NATO alliance is way bigger than it was 3 to 4 years ago. But it's not durable enough. So getting this work done continuously, we have to get more forces, and we have to get the modern capabilities. And modern capabilities can be inserted fast if you adapt to the fact that the technology is there, use Ukrainian technology together with the companies in Europe, and adapt them fast in your force. I don't need per se an artillery system that is built like a Panzerhowitzer. I can use rocket in boxes that are already being produced at this moment and insert them in my own armed forces. I need to change my operational concept for that. But that's the way that we should do it. Adopt the current technology, change your operational concept, and show that you are willing and able to get that in the field. So in that way, you can force up the dilemma to the Russians. The Russians are at this moment very much involved in Ukraine. So I'm not worried for the short term, but I am worried for the midterm, like I said, 28, 2030. That is our weakest point, because that's the time that we need to get industry up and running and get the capabilities within our forces. We will go anyway. Dutch, UK, we will fight, we will defend, we will deter. But the worst what we can do is wait too long. If it is money, there is money enough. That's not the problem, but make choices. And I don't think this is the time to play with the security that we at this moment have. If we don't move fast, we will set our security at risk. And that's the worst thing that we can do. And of course, the future will tell us if we were right or wrong. I cannot predict what Russia will do, but that's immediately the biggest risk, because we cannot predict what Putin is thinking in his head. We don't know what Xi Jinping thinks when he wakes up, but we don't know what Putin thinks when he wakes up. And that's where we have to be ready for. That he sometimes wakes up and says, okay, it's now time to see if we can do an incursion in the Baltics or wherever, and see what the alliance does. So that's my answer there.
I'm going to pick up from what the General just said about making choices with a question that's come through the app from Tim Nelson. It's clear that most governments have a plan for the last war. It feels that we've entered a new era with AI, cyber, drones, and etc. What steps are needed to be ready for the next war? And is it clear where the funding should be directed when governments move to 3.5%? In other words, transformation. How many things like Apache gunships or whatever, and how many uncrewed systems, AI, cyber, the balance of spending. I'd love to hear from you, Julian, on this as well, but also, obviously, the General. Maybe you go first, Julian, and then General Eichelsheim.
Well, I'm a bit of a radical on this, Mark. I mean, I think we need a European way of war. And when I use the word war, a way of war, and that would be not necessarily the same as the American way of war. One of the weaknesses of the transatlantic relationship right now is that the US compares the European way of doing war or not doing war against their own and then judges it to be a failure. Well, in fact, we would do it differently. Now, what do I mean by that? The Russians have carried out, the Frunze embankment, a systematic analysis of our vulnerabilities. Our open society vulnerabilities, our social media vulnerabilities, our infrastructure vulnerabilities, our defense vulnerabilities. The Chinese have done it too, and they're exploiting it every day. So as Europeans, we need to work together strategically to examine their vulnerabilities and communicate it to them as part of deterrence, that we know where your vulnerabilities are. It's no good, for example, the Secretary of State saying, we know you're doing this. Because the Russians will come back and say, well, you might know that we're looking at your undersea water infrastructure, but what can you do about it? And by the way, the Russians have planted remote explosive devices that could explode and destroy that infrastructure. What is the Secretary of State doing about that? We need to deal with the minutiae of Russian strategy against us.
Hang on, when those mini subs were down there, they've planted it.
That's my understanding.
You've just broken a huge story there, I think.
Well, I have it from a reliable source, but I'm told that the Russians have, and this is not the first time they've been there, by the way.
Yes.
So, and they're up to something. Let me put it this way. There could very well be Russian explosive devices on the seabed. Because they've been doing something down there. And whether they're there or not, they're going to be there. So it's no good to say we're watching you. They need to feel in the Kremlin that not only are we watching you, but we can act against them.
Yes.
We can stop them doing this. We can prevent them concentrating forces. We can prevent them through cyber attacks. And that's what we lack. And the European way of war would be a strategic audit of European capabilities and capacities, civilian and military, that could be organized in such a way to deter Russia, to communicate that.
General, I don't want to keep going on about your past in the Apaches because you represent all of Dutch defence now. But it's only a matter of months ago that people were saying, gunship helicopters, so yesterday. Then, of course, we see them shooting down Shahed missiles and things like that. Suddenly people are saying, okay, they could be really useful in these defensive contexts. But I think that gets to the questioner's point about, do we know what to invest in? You know, what's the balance between new tech and old? Are you confident that you can get that right with this increased funding?
This case, it's an evolution of a weapon system that you have, and you use it for another purpose. But that's of course not the way that you should attack a Shahed, to be honest. There are other capabilities out there already that we did not incorporate enough within our force, because we are too much relying on the conventional capabilities that we have. So, and that's actually also what the Middle East, what the Gulf states did as well. They did not convert fast enough, even with their amount of money, towards the threat that was already very obviously out there. So if you don't adjust to the threat for the ballistic missiles, for the Shahed, for the drones, for actually the 360 also within Europe threat that's coming, or from the seabed or from other positions, you are outnumbered, and you will have a hard time in winning this war. So what I meant to say is that, of course, we have the conventional systems, but we have to shift them fast into the new capabilities. And for me, as an Apache pilot, it will mean that somewhere in time there will be no Apache, and somewhere in time there will be no F-35, but it will be an unmanned system.
Yes.
And I'm not worried about that fact. I'm more worried about that if we don't get European industry working at those concepts, it will take too much time. That's right. Because the concepts are partly already there. So getting that working with industry, we will get there. And back to Julian, it's not only the eastern flank that is our threat. Yeah. There is a 360 approach towards the threat within Europe. It could be hybrid or others, and that's where we have to our deterrence for.
Thank you, General. We're going to take another, we've got just under a quarter of an hour, and we're going to take a few from the floor now.
Thank you very much. Tim Willesey, King's College, London. I love the sort of sense of urgency that we're getting from the panel for the fourth year in succession. My question is, there's one subject that no one has really mentioned on the panel, which is, the suggestion is we're all on the same side, but are we on the same side? I mean, Vance has just been in Budapest trying to get Orban re-elected. Orban is not on our side. The Slovaks are not on our side. Even the Czechs and Austrians are a bit flaky. The real question, and if we look at everything that President Trump has said over the last, 18 months, his sympathies are more with Putin than they are with Zelensky. Now, I know the Congressman has said something rather encouraging, suggesting that, that's wrong. But I think the fundamental question is, are we really all on the same side? And that is the question we should be addressing.
Yeah, I'll take this one. So I take a very ecclesiastical perspective to life, that there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing today that hasn't been already, and there's nothing tomorrow that will be that hasn't already been today. I think the greatest problem that we've identified through the last year of the London Defense Conference is that we all in this room understand that we have a really big problem, but our constituencies don't. I know that's the case for the lawmakers, military members of the UK, and certainly as you move from east to west, that becomes an increasingly larger problem for European states, is getting their populations to actually understand that we are in pre-crisis. Not just that we're in pre-crisis, we're in crisis right now. But fundamentally, we don't ever really change, at least in the United States, and I believe this of the West in general, until we actually hit genuine crisis. Ukraine is in crisis right now. Israel is in crisis right now. Outside of that, everybody else is really in pre-crisis, and as you move west, you move into normalcy. And particularly as we fight our wars, the way that we fight them now is that we have a very limited portion of the population that is actually engaged in the conflict. That creates a distension between the realities that we could be facing and our readiness to adjust to those realities. And so I think when the rubber hits the road, we all know what side we're going to be on, but because we're not genuinely in crisis right now, or the majority of our constituencies and populations do not believe that we're in crisis, I think that that's naturally the time where we like to argue with each other.
Question there.
Toby Harris, I'm a member of the House of Lords and I chair the National Preparedness Commission. I'd want to follow on exactly from where the Congressman has left off, because you've all talked about the imperative of working together across Europe, but there is a first imperative for all of the governments in Europe before they are able to make the difficult choices which will be necessary to invest more in defence, invest more in homeland security and resilience. They have to win public consent. The Strategic Defence Review in the UK called for a national conversation on that. So far, that conversation has been conducted in whispers, despite all the efforts of the London Defence Conference. So what can be done to make sure that the public sees this as an imperative, even if that means some of the other public programmes have to be put on the back foot? Do we have to wait until the explosives on the undersea cables are actually activated before people take note of it? What can be done to activate that view as far as the public is concerned?
You want to dive in, Julian? Yeah.
Simply, I find this argument that we must wait for public opinion to agree before we invest is complete nonsense. It's called leadership. Whatever government's in power, it's government that has the information about the threat that we face. It is government that has the power to then prepare the country to face those threats. And if a Prime Minister of whatever hue has seen that information, and I'm sure if he's seen far more of the information I've seen, then clearly there is an imperative, then leadership requires him to stand up and say to the British people, I'm terribly sorry, I believe in investing more in welfare or whatever, but the situation is such, I have to tell you that the government has decided to act. And I'm pretty sure that the majority of British people, when faced with that act of leadership, would simply say, okay, Prime Minister, get on with it. This idea that the public somehow has to give permission about something about which it knows squat is, to me, a dereliction of duty.
Democracy, surely.
Threat reaches a point where democracy requires action if you wish to protect it.
Dame Karen, I don't want to unfairly ask you this question, but just following on from Lord Harris and what we've just heard, are we in some way embarrassed as Brits to to try and shape public perception in this. I was very struck by the General's remarks about what they're doing in the Netherlands in terms of sort of disaster training or resilience, trying to get people to understand, you know, it might be a natural disaster, it might be all sorts of other things that might require first aid, social organisation, all these other things, but extremely useful in time of war. We seem reluctant or in some way embarrassed to actually try to start organising the British people in that way.
It's not complete nonsense, to be honest, what is said, because you need some foundation in the public that they understand how important it is to invest in defense and how important it is for them. But that is an open door. But I think what we have seen happening in the Netherlands is that we gave the public a possibility to do something for resilience by themselves. So we gave them the opportunity to help us out. We reached out to them and they grabbed the hand. Yeah. Because, okay, shit, we can do it ourselves. Okay, no, we need to go to resilience training, or we need to have a 72 hours survival package, or we need to, okay, now actually they understand that by giving 3.5% to defense, it will mean cuts in social health care, it will mean cuts in the medical capabilities that we have in the Netherlands. And it is actually understood. But we also have to show what do you get back from the armed forces if you spend 3.5%. And that's not only in getting companies working better, it's also in if I build a hospital, it's also their hospital. If I build a caserne, I build a energy capability that's also good for the village. If I build a caserne, I also build housing, which is good for the housing in the Netherlands. So it is something that you can give in return for the public, that they understand, okay, it's not only losing money for our security, if you can call it losing, we also get something back for it. So you have to have that discussion. And suddenly, even in the Netherlands, the discussion about serving for the Dutch, we didn't start it, they started it themselves. Yeah. On the social media, they said, hey, perhaps we have to serve permanently within the force. We never discussed this. Well, we sometimes discuss it through the politicians, but so if you are open for your public to this and are open about the dilemmas, about the problems, and about what they can do within the resilience, you will see that it is actually, well, at least we saw it in the Netherlands, that it gets momentum.
Can I say something very quickly? I think it's incumbent upon lawmakers and members of any administration to just be honest in their communications.
That's right.
Yeah. That's a fundamental baseline that politics gets involved and it gets messy, but we have to be very straightforward with our constituencies, particularly when we know, and we learned from last year, 85% of folks in the UK don't want to take a dollar from the welfare state and move that over into defense. If you tell them that we are indeed ready, why on earth would they think that they need to move that dollar?
That's right.
We can have a bomb on our front door and say that we know about it and say that we're ready to walk out our front door every day because we know about the bomb, but if the bomb is there, you're fundamentally not ready.
I think there's a solidity in British life that means when there's a crisis, the British people respond magnificently and very fast. But steady state, it's a much harder thing, as the Congressman was saying, to get people to imagine something they're not confronted with. So I quite agree with you about honest conversations, and I think some of those are starting in the UK. But we also lead in this country. We are lucky enough to have not very many internal shocks like the Japanese would have if they had an earthquake, for example. When I was in Japan, it was my first posting, every Japanese family knows what to do if there's an earthquake, every Japanese family have a kit. We have nothing like that in the UK, and we're very fortunate that we don't. But it means that we're asking people to think about these issues absent something right in front of them. So I think part of the answer is to start the conversation, as the General said. Part of it is to describe it very clearly, what the challenge is, and what the choices will be. We don't like choices very much, and that's a wider debate. It is a national conversation that needs to start happening.
Yes, you make a fascinating point about Japan, and a couple of years ago in Taiwan, I saw civil defense training being carried out in a sort of dual-use way about, oh, this will be really useful for an earthquake, but also, of course, if there's a missile blitz from mainland China. Congressman, can I come back to you? I'd sensed in something you said about the small number of people carrying the burden, that it reminded me of times when I was with your brothers and sisters in arms embedded, where they talked about the 1% that was fighting America's war on terror, as it was called then. Do you think this change is not happening in the US either? This change to a sense of the whole of society has to be ready to confront some really big potential problems in the years ahead?
I think there's no question about that, right? I mean, when we systematically detach, and we have to understand from where we were in World War I and World War II, all working together as a whole of government, a whole of society effort, every single person sacrificed for that war effort. What we did during the global war on terror is we fundamentally detached who was responsible for executing the global war on terror from the rest of the 99% of the population. To the point where I went to I think it was my 10th high school reunion, and I had my classmates astounded that I was about to deploy to Afghanistan in a couple weeks, and a couple of them actually said, "We're still in Afghanistan?" And I think that has a very pernicious impact on society, because it allows for, number one, debt leveraged conflicts. I think that is unbelievably pernicious for Western society, but it also divorces a society from the sacrifice that should be required to properly execute and finish and win a war. It allows a war with an indeterminative outcome, which is why we are in the security problem that we face today across the globe.
Thank you so much. You are almost to a second bringing us out on time. So
I tried to get there.
Yeah, there you are. You've done it. So thank you so much for that. Listen, what an extraordinary panel in terms of opening all these questions. We'll see how well we answer some of these in the 2 days ahead. There is, in that vein, at 11:15, a panel in here moderated by Erin McLean on warfighting in the future of warfighting, I should put it in its correct form. So exactly trying to take forward some of the things we've been talking about and get into the detail of what we can now prepare for, how we should focus our efforts. But until then, that's 11:15. Your time is your own for coffee, networking, and phone surfing. So let's thank the panel for a tremendous link.
Thank you.
Thank you.